9. The fourth puzzle's solution. All signs pointed to us getting inside the giant hamster wheel and running. It looked like we'd have to break the fourth rule. Greg's illustration of the giant hamster running its broken wheel through a city made us think we had to do something like that ourselves. Well, the running part. The broken part made us think we were meant to break a rule. When it came to the white elephant, Jennifer mentioned something she'd learned in a university lit class from some Hemingway story about abortion. Something symbolic about a white elephant being a gift from kings to people they didn't like. A white elephant was a costly gift to maintain, and it was so revered that you couldn't put it to work to get your money back. It was a gift you didn't want. Patrick thought maybe it was related to Greg's hamster and the hospital bills his aunt had to pay after her bite got infected. Greg's sporadic mumblings while taking notes helped us to the conclusion that the glittering orb made of old bottle caps was related to a favorite saying of his when younger. One person's trash is another's treasure. Apparently, it was even an expression he reminded himself of nowadays when helping design advertisements. As for the salt, once we tried a little on the smooth surface of the inside of the wheel and ran our hands over it, it seemed like it would not give us a whole lot more traction when running inside. Then, I remembered something I heard about how salt might keep out ghosts and demons, and I said as much to the others. We got ready to sweep it up using the broom and dustpan. Figured we'd put it in front of the room's opening. If those entities ran towards us once we broke rule number 4, once we got to running inside the wheel, maybe that salt on the floor would stop them. For a while, Greg had been pretty silent, mostly only jotting down and drawing things in his new sketchbook. But then he had a whole lot to say. "Gallon guys," Greg said, "I've done a fair amount of research on matters concerning ghosts and demons. I thought it would help with my duties back when I gave a hoot and wasn't a slave to the corporate system. Salt doesn't always work, and we don't know if the entities we'll have fall under those categories. Besides, we should take a moment to consider something important. You know how we were vague with some items in the house when we put them into the design as kids? And how we think the house might be, filling in the missing details? Well, we left the puzzles vague. I think it wants us to get into the wheel and run. I think it's using the salt to trick us into doing that." "But we came up with the clues," Jennifer said, "including the salt." "Sure, but that's why the clues all fit," Greg said. "Whether it's a piece we literally use to solve a puzzle or just a hint of its solution. We did plan on each floor puzzle relating to one of us. That's why one person took care of the items in each puzzle room instead of us all handling them together. But at that time, I think it was rather random. We didn't know how they'd all fit together. We weren't sure about the puzzles or didn't want to do them yet." "That's right," Patrick said. "And those items, at least for me, were placeholders. I remember thinking that once I figured out what my puzzle would be, I'd come back to it. Change some of the things in the room to be more clue-like." "But we didn't come back to it," Greg said. "We considered the house finished with the puzzles still nothing more than the things around them, with arrows or circles and the word puzzle pointing out where it would be." "No," I said. "We didn't finish. The house was complete, but not finished. There were some things we could have made better. We gave up. About the time we gave up on Sally coming back." "Whatever the case," Greg said, "I'm pretty sure the house has been using what we put in each puzzle room to make up the puzzles for us. Maybe it's somehow tapping into our memories or subconscious to do that. Or maybe it's just using what's in the house. I don't know. Either way, it wants us to fail. If we put that salt down in front of the entrance, thinking the entities won't pass beyond it, and one of us gets in the wheel and runs, I believe we'd be doing exactly what it wants. We haven't seen these things run yet. I don't think we have to. We should exhaust all our options first." Going back to the drawing board, which for Greg was back to his sketchbook note-taking, we returned to ways of making the wheel spin without any of us running inside it. That was a doozy, because we could not get it to budge from the outside, even when gripping the bands that ran about 6 feet intervals along the interior. Somebody said something about the wheel needing a person's weight in there for it to spin. About how if someone just got in there, it would unlock the wheel's movement and the others of us might be able to spin it from the outside while the other person was inside. The force of the spin would keep them in place. They wouldn't need to run. We had our concerns though. What if the person inside lost their footing, or the people outside made a mistake and the person inside accidentally started running? That's about when we remembered that the white elephant statue, when we tried to move it, had seemed to weigh about as much as a person. The white elephant statue might not be so useless or burdensome after all. We hauled it and set it down beside the giant hamster wheel. "Let's hope it's worth its weight," Jennifer said. She gave it a little pet. I had an idea from something I'd seen another guy do in construction. After discussing it, we turned that treasure back into trash. We broke the sparkling globe of bottle caps. We swept up the salt into the dustpan and put it down inside the wheel where we would place the elephant. Then, similar to a kind of trick I'd seen someone in construction who did not have their tools on hand use to hold something in place temporarily, we put the bottle caps in among the salt. We faced some up and some down. Neither the teeth at the bottom of the bottle caps nor the salt were ideal for holding anything in place, much less the smooth wheel's interior to the relatively smooth bottoms of the elephant statue's feet. But if we used the salt and the toothy bottle caps in conjunction for a slight grip for when we got the wheel going, the force of its spin when we spun it faster might be enough to keep the elephant statue in place. We used the broom for something other than just sweeping. We put it inside the little loop of the elephant's trunk. Our thinking was that the broom handle could function as a long handle we could all grip. Then we took deep breaths, did our little counting thing that by now had become a ritual, and together lifted the heavy elephant statue up and placed it in the wheel. Something clicked. We didn't waste any time. If we waited too long after that click, we might fail the puzzle. Maybe we had already failed. There was enough space on the broom handle extending from the elephant's trunk for each of us to put our hands on it. It took us a little bit to get our rhythm in sync, but together we got the wheel moving. We had to get it going fast to keep the elephant from dropping. Faster. A little salt sprayed out the sides, the bottle caps alternating facing up and down held. Faster. The wheel was spinning at a running pace, but for all we knew, the puzzle hadn't been solved. No doors opened up to us. My arms felt like they were being pulled out of their sockets. I imagined they'd keep going, still gripped on the broom handle. One separated from my body as the wheel was spun more and more frantically. I kept glancing at the crazed yet frightened cartoony face of the hamster and its giant wheel terrorizing the city in that illustration on the wall. The four of us in the white elephant statue got that wheel going so fast that I began to think it was a wonder it didn't break loose like the one in the illustration. That's exactly what it did. When the wheel finally broke loose from its frame, Greg yelled out for us to let go. I suppose it was a little similar to how he had to let go of his pet hamster when he was a kid, except this physically hurt. Of course, the longer you held on, the more it would have hurt. The giant hamster wheel and the elephant in it slammed against the wall and toppled. I was surprised it didn't so much as put a dent or crack in the wall. We were all groaning and rubbing our shoulders, arms, or hands. We sat for a while. No sign of the entities or the footsteps, but we sat facing the room's entrance just in case. Where the wheel had been, a hole had opened up under its frame. As we started to feel better, we got up and peered down into the hole. It was slanted like a laundry chute, or like a pitch-black water slide tube without the water. "Well," I said, "we solved the puzzle, so this should be pretty straightforward." We debated for a little, but then decided to risk it. Nothing else had opened up to us, and we knew, because of how we designed the house in Greg's old sketchbooks, that the door back through the ballroom would be locked to us. Not that we were eager to go back through there anyway. As we were starting to play rock, paper, scissors to decide who would go first, Patrick said in an even, almost monotone Geronimo as he disappeared down the chute. We waited for a minute, then we called. When we didn't hear back, we decided to go down after him. We agreed to each wait about 30 seconds so as to avoid hitting each other. I went last. It was a long slide down in the darkness. I called out to the others as I went down it. No one replied back. I felt alone for the first time I'd been in that house. Then I heard agonized shouts up ahead. I tried to slow myself as much as I could by applying pressure to my heels and putting my hands against the walls. It hurt, but not as much as hitting my friends would. I heard them calling up to me. Patrick had slammed into a wall down there. He was hurt. Moving my shoes to the side when I was really close, I avoided much of the impact with Jennifer in front of me. She grunted as both of us did our best to buffer the impact. I could see nothing, probably the darkest place I'd been in. Flashlights might have come in handy. Maybe they were considered electronic by the house, but we could have at least used a candle or gas lantern. Something. Patrick had checked ahead that electricity was running to the house. We banked on being able to use the house's lights that we had drawn in years ago, but we hadn't taken into account the secret puzzle corridors in between. By the way, that was something else we didn't put into the house. I'm not sure if we forgot or if we hadn't done it yet because we never made the puzzles. As far as we knew, the house made those secret corridors for us. Down there in the dark, we were pretty sure Patrick had broken one of his legs. I guess we all hoped that due to some magic of the house, it would somehow deposit us from this slide or chute into the floor we'd been on above us. You know, paradoxes and everything. Seemed like the house liked those. Instead, we just slid down and hit a wall. "Hang on," Patrick said. "There's some rugs above me protruding from the wall. I think we're meant to climb back up. Man, this hurts." "Can you climb, Pat?" Greg said. "Maybe," he said. "If I can only use my arms, my good leg." "We could help from below," Jennifer said. "Just don't touch my right leg." "Can't see it, Pat," Greg said. "Can't see nothing." "I'll let you know with a scream." Speaking of screams, something was sliding down towards me. I was the last of the four of us. "Guys," I began. "We've got Something slammed into me. Luckily, it struck my shoulders and the top of my back and not my head. Even so, pain went up and down me, like my entire body had become a bad tooth. It took my mind off the chemical burns on the back of my hand that had still been somewhat bothering me. Fingers or something like fingers got into my hair. I tried to twist around to see if I could get some leverage on whoever or whatever was behind me, but it kept me from getting a good handle on it. "Go up," I said. "There's something physical in here with us. It's grabbing me." Grunting through his own pain, Patrick started to climb up the rungs, and Greg and Jennifer after him. I couldn't see them at all, but I heard them going up. I gave it a warning in case it was a person, like Sally in there with us. Told it to let go unless it wanted to get popped. Then I used all the strength I had from that position to strike behind me with my hands and elbows. I hit air. Dark, blank, dry nothing. When I climbed up behind the others, I kept thinking how I felt something on my neck or back. Couldn't tell how much of that was the after effect of getting struck or my imagination. There was a light above. Kept thinking something would grab my foot and yank me down. It didn't. The ladder brought us back up to the 4th floor anteroom next to the stairs, where a panel in the floor had opened up. My pain after getting clobbered by whatever had been behind me was residing to a dull, tired throb. Patrick was hurt worse. However, he could stand and even walk on his foot, though he hobbled. It seemed to be an ankle sprain rather than a broken bone. Even so, we had to comfort him as he expressed his worries of being a dead weight. "Now I might as well have turned back before," he said as Jennifer and I got on either side of him. "I got the feeling that ain't the case," I said. "You took one for the team, Pat," Greg said. "If not for you, then someone else probably would have gotten messed up. Somebody had to go first." "Hey," Jennifer said. "We just have one more floor left." It was true. One more floor, and then the attic and whatever secrets it held. Secrets like the treasure. Propping Patrick up, we stood together facing the flight of the stairs that would take us to the 5th floor. Part 10. The 5th floor. Together, we walked up the final flight of stairs to the 5th floor. We had not designed a way into the attic, which is one of the reasons I considered our designs unfinished. Years ago, sitting in our parents' apartments, we had made the notion that the 5th floor puzzle room would take whoever solved the 5th puzzle directly to the attic. The attic was a treasure room as well as an attic after all, and we had intended to make it very difficult to get there. As I've mentioned, if we thought that we might someday face this house and that making it as difficult as we could back then would somehow help us get our friend Sally back, I don't think we ever stated it aloud as kids. Based on what we'd seen so far as adults, we could only assume that the house would fill in the details as to how we would get from the puzzle room to the attic. Before the puzzle room and the attic though, there was the rest of the 5th floor that needed crossing. By the time we got up the stairs and were walking through the 5th floor anteroom, Patrick seemed to have gotten better at hobbling on what we were hoping was just a bad ankle sprain. The expressions on his face, though, made me think that the pain was as bad or worse than it had been. In this anteroom, there were a series of photorealistic paintings that my mind kept telling me were real blown-up photographs. The frames were gilded and elegant, a stark contrast to the subject matter. These framed pictures were about the dolls' head pots with plants in them on the front porch of the house. From left to right on one wall, they showed first a doll head being removed from its body, then it being sawed open with a saw, then filled with an actual brain, then filled the rest of the way with soil. The final 2 pictures showed a dead or dying plant, something like a small tomato plant without its fruit, being transplanted to the doll head pot, and lastly, what looked like a dried shriveled heart being attached to a branch of the dead or dying plant with twine, as if the dried heart were some kind of makeshift fruit. In all of these pictures, the hands of whoever was doing these things was always out of view. "That brain and heart," Patrick said. "That wasn't our doing." "Yeah," Greg said. "Not to mention how realistic it is. Guess I was a good enough doodler as a kid, but I couldn't have made anything approaching that level of realism in one of those old sketchbooks. Nobody could. It's like someone really took pictures while putting one of those doll head pots out in front together," Jennifer said, "and then took some liberties." My mouth has gotten very dry. I had to borrow Patrick's water bottle. "Well," I said, "Sally did like dolls, and the creepier the better. Similar to other anterooms, I think we had put all this stuff in to prepare who was going through the house for what was beyond. We knew that what was on the 5th floor would be almost entirely Sally. Unlike the other floors, which we kind of shared, other than the puzzle room, we ended up moving most of her ideas up to the 5th floor, the highest floor next to the attic, after she had disappeared. We had done that to honor her. By the way, the mannequins on a couple of the other floors had been her idea to begin with. She used to say, "What are mannequins but grown-up dolls?" The next room had some of Sally's creepiest doll ideas. Dolls sat on shelves with their heads completely turned around. Dolls were glued together into towers and pyramids. There was decaying furniture so overrun with dilapidated dolls and doll parts that you couldn't tell where the furniture ended and the doll parts began. Doll heads were used as bowls, vases, and light coverings. Doll limbs were arranged on the floor in random, yet strangely esoteric patterns. The next bedroom was like this as well. But there was a human skeleton in that next bedroom. I nearly fell over and took Patrick with me. Greg and I were supporting Patrick and his leg hurt at that point. We were taking shifts. The skull on that skeleton had been replaced by a doll's head. It took us a few moments before we recalled that this had been Sally and Greg's idea. However, any relief we had upon remembering was quickly replaced by even more terror. We had not colored anything in Greg's sketchbooks as kids. Any colors were all the house is doing. By now we understood that it liked to fill in the details, often to dramatic effect. The eyes of the doll head on top of the skeleton were green. The hair was blonde, like Sally's. "It's just messing with us," I said. "Hey Patrick, your dead weight as you called it is already coming in handy. I think I might have wandered a bit after seeing that skeleton if we weren't propping you up." "Yes," Jennifer said. "A trap should be next to that, between that skeleton and the front of the door." Some dolls sailed past us. My heart seemed like it was halfway out of my ribcage. Sharpened bones had zipped by, missing us by less than a foot. They'd come from an inconspicuous recess in the wall like flying spears. Greg sauntered up next to the other 3 of us, who were trying to support Patrick and keep our own balance at the same. "You've got to spring every trap you can," Greg said. "Treasure hunting 101, or haunted house trapping 101. I'm not really sure." "You're crazy," Jennifer said. "Yeah," he said. "Tell me that again when this is done and we're getting ready to leave." Greg had a decent point. Although the other puzzle rooms had secret passages that had led back to the anterooms and stairway after solving the puzzles, this time would probably be a little different because presumably we'd be going up to the attic and then coming down from the attic, if we survived. It looked like Greg had thrown some dolls into the pressure-plated area for that particular trap. I kept getting mental images of somebody else's sharpened bones sticking out of my body. The next room was even worse by design. The stench of decay hit us as soon as the door was opened. This bedroom was furnished with an opulent nightstand, mirror dresser, and a canopy bed with curtains. There was horse riding paraphernalia decorating the walls and shelves, like an antique riding crop and riding helmet. Sally loved horses. When I used to think about what I hoped had happened to her instead of what probably happened, I would imagine her having run away from the cramped spaces of our apartment complex to become a professional equestrian in some nice, open place. Or maybe she had joined a circus where she did tricks with horses, but she had a good family that she would have been running away from. Even though money had been tight for them, her parents had once paid for all of us to go horseback riding on a ranch together. That had been a whole lot of fun. Scary, but fun. I kept thinking I was going to fall off or get thrown from one of those large animals. Our guide had been aloof, but Sally had helped me through it. I think she helped all of us through it. That had been when she was 11 and the rest of us were 9 and 10. By the time her 12th birthday had come, she was gone. I went over to the other side of the large, elaborate bedroom and tested the other door. "Yep," I said. "It's locked." We tried to prepare ourselves for what we, mostly Sally and a heaping of Greg, had decided would be in the canopied bed of this room. It was another something we had to face to go farther. We drew aside the curtains. Inside, a unicorn was lying on the bed. Its horn was broken and a good portion of its face was sawed off to the bone. Flies and maggots had colonized both its surfaces and exposed interiors. "It's okay," Patrick said. He stood up on his own without two of us propping him up, though I could see him wince from the effort. "It's dead." In its mucky mane were objects that had been braided in, beaded and jeweled trinkets, symbols made of woven vines, and a silver key on a chain. It was the key that we needed. Somebody just had to reach over and unbraid the chain from the dead creature's hair. Jennifer and Greg had been supporting Patrick at the time, so I took it upon myself. I got a good breath, careful not to breathe through my nose, steeled myself, and figured I would just dive right in. The condition that the mane was in, it seemed the hair might just pull away with the key. A large horse's eye opened. We all got back as the, by all appearances, rotting unicorn carcass stood up on the bed and clopped down. On the bed where it had lain were pieces of hair and flesh that made an outline of its body. It galloped over to us, backed us into a corner. Its front hooves kept trying to clip us. Its green, grim teeth chomped inches from our faces. Its broken horn threatened a slower death than a sharper whole horn could. "One of us has got to run," Jennifer said, "to distract it while the others get the key." "We can't run," I said. "Rule number 4. Wouldn't do to have both the entities and that thing chasing us at the same time." "Gonna get ourselves killed if we don't do something," Patrick said. Then, Patrick hollered at the unicorn. He couldn't stomp his feet because of his injury, but I think he'd been hoping to frighten it. My stomach sank as it put a hoof into Patrick's chest, and I thought I heard something snap. At that point, we'd been letting the wall support Patrick, his body completely buckled to the floor. "Patrick!" Jennifer said. Patrick was crawling in a semicircle, face down, jerking. "I'm gonna gouge that thing's eye out," Greg said. As if understanding, the unicorn aimed its broken horn at Greg's face, and then charged. Jennifer pulled Greg out of the way. The unicorn thumped the wall and rammed against the tree trunk. Then, it walked back and got ready for another charge. The stench was crushing. More flesh, hair, maggots, and the other stuff had fallen off of it. One of its eyes did seem about ready to fall out. Maybe if we could keep dodging, its body would fall apart on its own. Or maybe the unicorn would find a way to keep moving until we were dead. But that got me thinking about falling in horses. It jogged loose a more specific memory of Sally. I'd been riding a horse behind hers on a trail near that ranch. My saddle seemed like it was sliding over, and my body too, and I was sure I was about to fall. The up and down motion was giving me a thrashing at the same time. I'd been trying to shout for help over the sound of hooves. As I alluded to before, our adult guide hadn't been very attentive to us. But Sally had ridden her horse back to me. She got a hold of my reins and was able to slow my horse down. I told her I was afraid and that I didn't want to do horse riding anymore. I was ready to go home. She said something to the effect of, "This horse doesn't want you to fall. It doesn't want you to get hurt. Relax. Work with it, not against it. Your horse will help you to keep from falling." It comforted me and allowed me to enjoy the rest of that day. Recalling that also helped me to remember more details of when Sally had put the unicorn into our design of this house. She had not wanted to put any horses into it. She had not wanted them to be scary or dangerous. Greg had pushed the issue though, because he kept emphasizing that the house needed that kind of stuff from her. The more she had said she should never try to make them scary, the more he had insisted. Eventually, she had compromised with this unicorn. Not a horse, not a mythical version of the horse, but if this zombie unicorn was true to Sally's wishes, I began to think maybe we weren't approaching it the right way. I got as calm as I could, which was very hard given the situation, and walked towards the unicorn. The unicorn had been charging again, but it slowed down like I'd actually confused it. Jennifer and Greg were screaming at me. "I can't speak for Sally," I told them, while being careful not to turn my back on the unicorn. "But maybe she'd say that it doesn't want us to get hurt. It's been hurt though. We should try to work with it." Slowly, I held out a hand. The unicorn snapped towards it, but it stopped. It sniffed the peace offering. I sighed, knowing how unpleasant it would be without really knowing, and I ran my hand through its decomposing scalp. Hair and less solid stuff came away from my fingers. I worked my way up to the key, and I worked the key loose. Greg and Jennifer were able to help Patrick up, who was breathing heavy and said he felt like somebody had taken a sledgehammer to his chest. All of us approached the unicorn and gave it some careful pettings. Even Patrick, who needed assistance. Seemed like Patrick was already recovering from getting hoofed in the chest. I was thinking to myself, I don't know what kind of diet or workout regimen he's on, but I've got to get on that myself. That guy was holding up quite well at things considered. Sliding down a long chute into a wall, getting kicked in the chest by an undead unicorn? Dang. But back to that unicorn. It tried to follow us out of the door when we unlocked the room on the other side. Seemed it was on its way becoming our very own pet zombie unicorn. Jennifer said that Sally would have been proud of how I handled it. I think that made Greg a little jealous. He didn't say as much, but I could tell. The key wouldn't leave inside the lock after we unlocked it, so we figured we had to abandon the key when we shut the door. When the door locked again behind us, it was a more audible click than for the previous floor. We heard the unicorn pawing at the door on the other side. This time, it wasn't a hallway, but a railway. There was a cart, and there was a tacky plastic ghost dangling above it. You know, the cliched little thing that's a sheet with two eyes and a round mouth cut into it. A round hat was on its head, and a cane was in the folds of what constituted as a hand. A little light on the ghost flashed in eerie blue, and an electric cheesy carnival vendor voice said, "Step right up for the ride of your lives. So close but so far if you're dead. Death can be a long, long journey. I should remind you, please keep your arms, legs, and head on your body at all times." Then there was ghoulish laughter. Again, more tacky than scary. We knew from our designs, though, that this tackiness was meant to throw the traverser of haunted houses off, to put them at ease and therefore make what came later even scarier and more dangerous. As I've been saying, we had been trying to make it as scary and dangerous as possible when we were kids. And this, after all, was the 5th floor. Only one person could get into that cart at a time. Maybe 2 kids could have fit, but we weren't kids anymore. It wasn't far that the cart had to go on that railway. It was about the same distance as the hallways directly below us. But we knew that it would go slowly, and that if you didn't get in that cart, if you tried to walk it, you probably would not make it very far. The larger blades would swing more quickly and randomly if you didn't get into the cart. That was how we had designed it anyway. There were little blades inside the cart itself and larger ones in the grooves of the walls. The ones inside the cart stuck out like porcupine's quills, forcing you to stand up, while the larger ones swung back and forth like pendulums, forcing you to duck down into the cart. If you ducked or stood up at the wrong time, you might get yourself fouled up pretty bad. The saving grace for the trap that was the blades operated on prime numbers 5 and below. 2, 3, and 5. Once you figured out the pattern, you could wait the correct number of seconds. Problem was, it was different each time, so the first person didn't have it any easier or harder than the next. Greg offered to go first. He got cut a little at first through his sock by one of the cart's extending and retracting quills, and that gave us a pretty big fright because he still had a long way to go. But at the end of the railway, he got out and shouted back to us that he was alright. I think his pattern had been 2 seconds, then the little cart blades, 5 seconds, then the larger pendulum blades, repeat, or something like that. Or that might have been mine. I don't remember. As soon as Greg jumped out, the cart started coming back. Jennifer went through with some near misses, but without getting cut. I still think that in most days, she's got the best balance and agility out of the 4 of us by far. I waited for Patrick to go because I wanted to watch from behind, in case I could help from that angle in some way. We were most worried about him. Oddly, it was like getting knocked around woke something up in Patrick, because he seemed to do the best of us then, even with a sprained ankle and what we hoped was just a bruised chest. It wasn't pretty though. Patrick shouted about every time he stood up and was grunting in between. When I saw him afterwards, he was all snotty-nosed, bleary-eyed, and drenched in sweat. As for me, I got cut a little in the beginning like Greg did. It was those quills in the cart that got me just like they got Greg. Through my jeans and into the side of my calf as I was trying to stand. It probably would have been a whole lot worse if I'd been wearing shorts. After those first cart blades disappeared though, I was able to duck down and count and learn the seconds for the pendulum blade, and then I had a pretty good idea of my sequence. When I got through, when all of us were through, we glanced over each other's scrapes. Finding Greg and mine to be nothing worthy of stitches, we stopped to celebrate. We gave ourselves a few cheers, figured we deserved it. Patrick joked, I hoped he was joking, that he might keel over and die later from internal injuries, but he'd do all in his power to put that on hold until after we'd gotten the treasure. The house had thrown nearly everything at us, and so far we'd survived. We'd risked our lives. We felt that we could do it a few more times if we had to. We felt that we were readier than ever to see it through to the end. But in the room after the railway, the final puzzle room, baffled us more than any other had. It baffled us through its simplicity. It was a bright room, white walls, white ceiling and floor tiles. There was a medium-sized round wooden table at the center of the room where the puzzle should be. On top of the table was a little wooden tray with a slanted receptacle or nook. There was a silver key in the nook, and there was a wire running behind it and into the wall. We were as thorough as always, searching every square inch and crevice of that puzzle room, which was about the size of the 4th and 3rd floor puzzle rooms. Here are the only clues we could see in the 5th floor puzzle room. A medium-sized round wooden table in the center of the room where the puzzle should be. On the top of this table, there was a wooden tray with a slanted receptacle, kind of like a pocket or nook. Upon closer inspection, we found the receptacle to be about 3 inches wide and about 7 inches deep. A silver key that seemed to be lodged into the bottom of the inside of the tray's nook or receptacle. We had some concerns that removing this key would start the puzzle. A wire running from the receptacle's tray backside and into the wall opposite the room's entrance. A part of the wiring was frayed, almost broken, nearest the back wall. The floors, wall, and ceiling of the room were all white. Combined with the brightness of the room's lighting, it made us feel as if it were difficult to tell exactly where the walls were. Those were all the clues. We were having trouble not just because of how little there was in that room to go on, but because Sally wasn't there with us. This had to be Sally's puzzle. But what did any of this have to do with her? We racked our brains. The only thing I could think of that might relate Sally to the stuff in this room was about puzzles in general. Just like the haunted house had been Sally's idea to begin with, having puzzles in our haunted house had been Sally's idea too. Hadn't it? And hadn't Sally said something about how puzzles, when it really came down to it, were nothing more or less than a collection of rules? And how once you discovered the secret of those rules, you'd solve the puzzle. Jennifer and Patrick felt I might be onto something. Greg wasn't so sure Sally had said those things. I was reminded again of that song on the second floor anteroom, played to us from an old gramophone, about how memory isn't as sure as destiny.